And that's all from London. Kamal, back to you in Doha.
Lovely, thank you for that, Jonah. We have a story now about UN aid workers bound for war-torn Yemen who were turned back by the Saudi-led coalition. The reason? Because there were journalists with them. Yemen's Saudi-backed government is accusing the UN of trying to smuggle in the journalists to try to spread propaganda. The plane was only allowed to leave the runway after the reporters disembarked. The Saudi coalition, of course, intervened in the Yemen conflict back in 2015. It controls the country's airspace, hence it took this action. We've got Sajid Mohammed Sajid with us now, Senior Humanitarian Affairs Officer at OCHA at the UN, joining us live from Sana'a. Look, thank you so much for your time. It just seems all a bit, I don't know if convenient is the word, but it's easy to blame the media, isn't it? Oh, they must be coming in to spread lies, so we can't let anyone in.
Yeah, the coalition yesterday cancelled the Djibouti-Sana'a humanitarian flight because BBC journalists were on passenger list. And the coalition claimed that the security of the journalist cannot be guaranteed in the areas which are not under the control of the government of Yemen. And that's why they have cancelled this UN humanitarian flight. And the total cancellation of the UN humanitarian flight has delayed the arrival of the aid workers and also the materials which were required for the immediate cholera epidemic relief, and Yemen is suffering from the huge cholera outbreak, and this is the only flight which brings the health worker and the aid worker and the supplies to the country to meet the demand of the cholera affected people, and which has already 1,817 people have died because of the cholera, and as on today more than 365,000 people are suspected cases of the cholera, and which consists of more than 80% of the entire country is affected from the cholera.
Presumably,
and UN flight is the only air bridge.
Presumably you don't have an issue with journalists travelling there, and I mean this argument about it's for their own safety. Do you buy that?
See, I can say the journalists had all the required documents for the travel, and they were coming to cover the humanitarian crisis and the humanitarian plight of the Yemeni people in Yemen.
So what can happen next? I mean, do you just not does the UN not give access to journalists to go in anymore? Because, I mean, I guess getting the aid in is obviously massively important, but getting the story out as well and making sure people are aware of how bad it is also equally as important. Well, no, not equally as important, but still very important.
Yeah, the situation of Yemen is catastrophic, with more than 20.8 million people are affected, and they have either one or another kind of humanitarian need. And using Sana'a airport is not operational, and humanitarian coordinator has requested for the resumption of humanitarian flights, and also the opening of the Sana'a airport, which is under the consideration of the government of Yemen.
Sajid Mohammed Sajid is from the United Nations in Yemen, joining us from Sana'a. We thank you very much for your time, sir.